Okay, so we're talking about cells today. I thought we'd start off with a fun cartoon. This guy's on his cell phone. He's working in the upper right-hand corner in the yellow cytology department. Cytology is the study of cells. So, cell theory has been developed since Anton van Leeuwenhoek invented the microscope back in the 1600s. And when he invented the microscope, he noticed that in a piece of cork, that as he focused in on it, he noticed that the cork was divided into sections. He thought the sections looked like jail cells, so he called them cells, and that's where we got the term cell. Now, as part of the cell theory, we have things like every living thing we've ever studied is made of cells. And I'm having issues here. Sorry about that. All living things are made of cells. We've never seen a living thing that's not made of cells. Therefore, we can say that all living things are made of cells. Cell theory part number 2. Cells only come from other cells. We've never seen a cell arise from nothing. We discussed this back in the beginning of the year when we talked about spontaneous generation. I'm not sure if you remember that, but in the beginning of the year, we read about a term called spontaneous generation. Which we now know is not true. We looked at some experiments that were done by a guy named Francesco Redeye, and a guy named Lazzaro Spallanzani that proved that spontaneous generation was not the truth. Okay, and of course, we had to get cells from something else at least once. That's a discussion for another day. Third part of the cell theory is that cells are the basic unit of structure and function. What does that mean? That means that the basic unit of structure, every living thing is built of cells. This wall that I'm standing in front of to do this in the school is made of blocks. That's the basic unit of structure of the wall. Cells are the basic unit of function. That means when we talk about how you work, we talk about how your body works, we have to understand how a cell works. Your brain is a collection of individual cells. So how does a brain cell work? If you can understand how a brain cell works, you can understand how all your cells work. And the example here is you break a cell up, it doesn't work anymore. So, what do all cells have in common? There's only a couple of things. They all have a membrane, which we'll look at in some detail later. And they all have cytoplasm. Oops. They all have a cell membrane to let things in and out, to hold stuff inside. We'll look at cell membranes in detail this week. And they all have cytoplasm, a kind of fluid, watery substance that is where everything is. I thought all cells had a nucleus. Now, this is where kids get confused. This is not equal to an atomic nucleus. The nucleus of an atom has protons and neutrons. The nucleus of a cell is extraordinarily a lot bigger. But all cells don't have a nucleus. Remember, we talked about this when we watched our video of prokaryotes. Okay? Prokaryotes, bacteria, don't have a nucleus. Here's an illustration of a bacterial cell. It has no nucleus. It has cytoplasm, and it has chromosomes. We'll talk about chromosomes when we talk about genetics later. Bacteria do have a cell membrane, though. So cells with nuclei, remember, are called eukaryotes. Eukaryotes not only have a nucleus, but they also often have other membrane-enclosed organelles. We'll talk about these in a minute. They're often larger cells than bacteria, okay, because they have other stuff inside of them. We're talking about the four kingdoms of living things that, okay, these are all, remember, eukaryotes were in the domain eukarya. Fungi, plants, animals, protists are all kingdoms of living things. So what does a cell do? A cell is basically a protein factory, and I have an illustration of a cell here. And I'm just going to briefly talk about that. Cell is basically a protein factory. We're going to learn this with genetics, that what you do, how you work, is essentially proteins are doing the work. Enzymes are proteins. We just talked about enzymes. Okay, so enzymes make chemical reactions happen faster. So let me just talk about some of these parts of the cell here and how they function to do this. You did, I think back in 6th grade, you probably did something like this cell project. The nucleus is kind of like the office where all the blueprints for making protein are. The mitochondrion is, quote, the powerhouse. It's what drives the cell. It's what gives the cell energy. Okay, kind of like in a factory, the place where all the electrical power comes in. Okay, ribosomes are the factory floor. They make protein. Golgi apparatus. They package proteins. Why would they have to package them? Well, it's a factory. Has to send them out. The rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. They're like the forklifts or the high-lows. They transport proteins in the cell once they are made. Peroxisome. This is like the thing that, this along with a lysosome, which is not on here. These are like the janitors in the factory. They clean it up. Now, because the cell is a living thing, well, here you see the term cytoskeleton. Cytoskeleton is kind of the thing that makes the cell have stuff. The cell is not like, it's like a soap bubble, and it's not. Your cells have solidity because of the cytoskeleton. It's like the walls of the factory. The centrioles here, this is a living factory, so it has to divide. So they help the cell divide, and we'll talk about those later when we talk about cell division. So your cells are essentially a protein factory. Everything inside of it has a job to do. Not sure where that word came from. Whoops. So, are all eukaryotic cells the same? Well, I think you already know the answer to this. The answer to this is no. Plants have a cell wall, for example, and animals do not. Plants have a large vacuole. Most animal cells have none or even a small one. So if you were to look at a plant cell in some detail, and we did, plants have a cell wall. Inside of that wall is a membrane. Inside of that membrane, generally in plant cells, is a large organelle filled with water called a vacuole. This helps plants to stand up. You don't need that because you have bones. Animals lack chloroplasts. Plants have chloroplasts. Chloroplasts have chlorophyll. Because plants are autotrophic, they do photosynthesis. So, to finish here, all cells are equal, but some cells are more equal than others. What does this mean? I have to move this over here a little bit. I just wanted you to see that. all of your individual cells are not the same either. Why? Well, the first reason is that you have cells specialized for their function. Right now, what I want you to do in your notes is jot down a couple examples. Think of a couple of cells that kinds of different cells you have, and see if you can think of what they do. Okay, you might have to pause this presentation to do it. I'm going to ask you for these next time. See, your cells contain different organelles. Okay, a review, organelles are things like nucleus, ribosome, okay, mitochondrion. An example here, red blood cells don't have a nucleus. Why don't they have a nucleus? They don't make anything. Red blood cells just transport stuff. That's all they do. So they don't have a nucleus because they don't need blueprints to make anything. Muscle fibers have hundreds of nuclei because if you think about muscle, we talked about this before, muscle is made of protein. So your muscle cells have to make lots of proteins. They have to have lots of blueprints to make protein. Okay, so that's the end of cell theory and cell types.